Welcome to Season 3 of CoinGeek Conversations. 2020 promises to be a big year for Bitcoin SV, and that's partly because of some changes to the underlying protocol that are going to be introduced in February with a hard fork called Genesis. And so I'm particularly pleased that my first guest in the new series is Daniel Connolly, who is the lead developer for Bitcoin SV at nChain. So thank you very much for doing this, Daniel.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
Well, now, the hard fork is happening on a certain date in February, a certain hour, a certain date. What exactly happens then?
Well, at that time, the protocol rules will change. There will be a new upgraded protocol rules. And all of the software, the up-to-date software, will start to enforce the new rules. To prepare for that, any users of the software need to make sure that they're running the latest version, which is 1.0.0, because that version has this behavior programmed into it. And
so we're talking here about the miners.
Yes, primarily miners, but there are other people who use the software, and anyone who's using the software will need to upgrade.
But when you say anyone, ordinary users of Bitcoin SV, if I've got my wallet and stuff, it's not going to affect me?
No, you're right. The normal users will, for the most part, not be affected at all. There are some very minor edge cases where users might be affected, but if you're using an up-to-date wallet software, it will be fine.
Because when you look at the sort of pie chart of who does the mining, it's actually a comparatively small number of groups who have to get on board with this, right?
That's right, yes. There's maybe 20 miners or something like that who are mining right now. They will all need to upgrade. Otherwise, their software will not accept the new rules.
And then what are the numbers for the listening nodes, who are the level above that?
Yeah, well, we know there are around 400, just over 400 nodes operating on the main network. The software is designed in such a way that we don't know which node does what or why they're there, right? What they're being used for. At a business level, we don't know what they're being used for. All of that software will need to upgrade, but when I say 400, it's normal. It would be normal for a miner, for example, to run several for high availability to make sure that their business is not disrupted. So the exact businesses that are using it, we're not entirely sure.
Right. So there's been a lot of publicity about Genesis. It's been sort of much anticipated. Could anything go wrong? Or what would happen if people are not getting this message?
Well, their node software will continue running, but at a certain point it will stop following the blockchain. So there might be a transaction or a block that their node does not recognize as valid. That might happen after the 4th of February. And then their node will stop following the chain, and it will sort of enter a frozen or paused state.
But can they sort of get back on track?
They can. They just need to install the latest version, and then it will upgrade and it will catch up. I checked yesterday, and of those 400, there were 100 nodes already that have updated. We expect more in the coming days. I've spoken to several of our partners, of people we talk with, and they're busy upgrading right now. So.
But when you say you saw that there's 100 who've upgraded, is there a sort of like big kind of mission control system at nChain where you can see exactly what's going on, or how does that work?
Well, I wouldn't call it control, because control sort of implies that we have some sort of
mission
influence on it. We have various tools that monitor the network, yes, and so we have one that checks on the status of nodes, so that's why we know there are about 400 of them.
But that's not a privileged position, then anyone could have access in that way if they chose to set it up, I suppose, could they?
Yes, and there are other groups who've done it too, who also have software running that does the same thing.
Right.
Right. So one of the things that the software does is that when a remote piece of software contacts it, it tells the remote piece of software what version it's running. Okay, and that's how we know that about a quarter of the network is already upgraded.
Right. Okay, so we talked about the low chance of any kind of terrible thing happening here. What about the positive side of this? What is really the point of this? What will people be able to do that they can't do now after Genesis?
So some of the biggest changes are actually philosophical, which won't directly impact people. But from a user's point of view, if you're using your wallet to send coins from one place to another, you won't notice any immediate difference. What it does enable is it enables much more scaling, so more transactions, so there's less likelihood of you being impacted in the future as the network gets more and more busy. And the other one is we call it the unleashing of Bitcoin script, which is very technical. Within Bitcoin, there's this language that you can use that developers could use to write complex contracts or complex functionality that runs on top of Bitcoin. And this upgrade will enable that, right? It will remove all of the controls that have been put on that language and enable full development using that language. But then we need developers actually to start using it.
Is this the MetaNet, or?
Not exactly. The MetaNet could use parts of it, but it's not solely related to the MetaNet. It enables like everything that some of the other blockchains can do. It enables that, right? So we could see complex contracts, automatic contracts happening.
Right. So there's startups like Tokenized. Yes. Who are wanting to get into that field. Mm-hmm. This will make life easier for them then, I guess.
Yes, it will enable them to give more capabilities to what they're doing. I haven't directly talked to Tokenized recently, so I'm not sure if they're immediately going to take advantage of these new capabilities in February, but I know they were looking at it and they were interested in what they could, how they could extend their service.
Now, with Bitcoin SV, we've got it sort of written into it that it's the Satoshi vision. In other words, an idea that it's going back to the white paper and the ideas in that. Are things like script opportunities like you're talking about part of going back to the original, or they sound very much like sort of moving forward rather than going back to how it used to be?
Well, technically it's going back to what it used to be. You see, at a certain point in time in the past, all these controls were put on script that really limited its capabilities. But the original vision of Bitcoin did include the possibility for complex transaction types, which is what contracts are. And there are quotes from Satoshi about that. It's just that the simplest transaction type, which is the transferal of Bitcoin from one person to another, or from one party to another party, is what has dominated over the last 10 years. But that is a really simple script that has like 3 or 4 operators in it. It is tiny. The actual capabilities of the language are much greater than that.
Right. So this goes back to the idea that I've heard quite often that money is just the first application of Bitcoin.
Yes,
would you
exactly. Yes, I'd agree with that completely. Yeah.
And so now we're opening up the other possibilities.
Yes. Yes. So. Yes, exactly. I mean, you can do complex contract types. You can manipulate data using a kind of sort of almost a program that's running on Bitcoin. Yeah.
So, is a money transaction essentially exactly the same as any other transaction that you might put on the blockchain? It just happens to have the subject of transferring X number of Satoshi from one person to another.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yeah, yeah. So another way of looking at it is you could think about the Bitcoin itself, so the BSV, the amounts of Bitcoins, as being a method to pay for the execution of the program. Instead of using it as a way of transferring money from one person to another, you could use it as a method to pay for the execution of that program on the Bitcoin network.
I mean, I'm beginning to think of the website Skyscanners, who were stuck with the name Skyscanners, even though they now offer hotels and all sorts of other services. Do you think we might are sort of in a way lumbered with the word Bitcoin as just one example of what we're interested in now? Maybe,
but I think it's more that Bitcoin has been misunderstood as just about transferring, value from one place to another. It's so much more than that. There's so many more capabilities, and they always were in the language. They were just heavily in the protocol. They were just so heavily constrained that it wasn't practical to do anything with it.
Right.
And those are the constraints that we're removing with Genesis.
You've been involved in this at a very, very deep level for a few years now.
Yes.
I mean, reading about it myself as somebody without a technical background, it's very interesting because it seems to me, I may look at a block explorer, but everything else is just sort of theoretical to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you're now involved in strategy here, as well as actual technical development, does it feel like a sort of incredibly complicated game that you're designing here, where you're trying to get different parties to do things?
It is really about building like a sandbox in which people can experiment and can not just experiment, but can actually build other systems that do something useful, right? So it's really it's the underlying layer here that we're working.
But in your head, there's all this tremendous detail about if this happens, then that could happen, and then the other thing could happen, and that's shared with a whole group of people that you work with and around the world. It is a sort of strange kind of enclosed culture in that respect, I suppose.
Yes, I suppose so. It's very deeply technical, and it's quite a small community who. Yeah.
But is that, you've worked in IT for a long time before this?
Yes.
Is that just the nature of IT, or is there something very sort of peculiar and special about this particular work?
Well, I don't think there's something peculiar and special. I think it's just that we're really in the details here, right? We're really at a low level. Like there is complications in the way that email is sent from one place to another, right? And the people who work in that field will know all of those details, and there's a lot of complexity there. But the key bit then is presenting it to the users as a very simple interface of, open a message, type your message, click send. And all of the underlying stuff that happens in the background is known by the experts and worked on by the experts, but is irrelevant to the people who are sending email.
But it seems to me that in this case, there is a sort of huge range between the absolutely minute technical details that people are still working on and the huge big picture vision of what it may mean. At least with email, you weren't going to completely change the way the world pays for everything or runs its economies. But the scope here is just fantastic.
Yes, it is, yeah. Yeah, there's so many possibilities, yeah, definitely.
And are you completely confident that this is all going to happen?
It's wise to be wary of being over-optimistic, but in this case, I think we've worked on it for a long time now. It is building on the foundations that were put in place 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and I'm confident that everything will go smoothly with Genesis.
But it's going to require embracing a massively larger population of people to buy into the whole vision, isn't it?
Well, that's the next step, right? That's. I mean, I'm concentrating mostly on the technical things here. I think the real, and this is something I've been I have been thinking about is that I'm working really in the details here at the low system. The real work of getting it out to people, of building applications that use it, that is starting, but it's still to come, right? And that's going to be fascinating to see what developers start to invent.
Because I saw one interview in which you said that you thought it was a pity that the Bitcoin world had not been ready to jump on the opportunities of contactless payments.
Yes.
Is there another opportunity that you can see coming along that we should make sure we don't miss?
Oh, that's interesting. So the idea of digital assets, owning something that's represented digitally, and you can transfer that ownership between people. I think that's a big area of growth. A lot of possibilities there. I see other people, other groups experimenting with this on other blockchains, and I really hope that I know the capabilities of Bitcoin SV can handle that too, and I really hope that that further development happens in that area. But a lot of that is not the strictly technical things that I'm doing, right? It's the going out to businesses. It's the presenting them with solutions that they can use.
You previously have worked for the UN.
Yes.
Does that show that you have a sort of ideological side to the work that you want to do? Is Bitcoin SV a world improving project as far as you're concerned?
Yes, I think it is, yeah. So you're right, I worked at the UN because I wanted to contribute to the world, and I know the UN has a lot of problems, but I think it is a good thing. When I first looked at Bitcoin, it was primarily from the technology angle that I was looking at it, and it was fascinating to see what had been invented. But then when you take it a step further and you look at the improvements it can make for everybody, that is what fascinates me about it.
But is that the old banking the unbanked and all that sort of stuff?
There is that. I think that the banks themselves or other companies have made progress with that a lot. So I understand in Africa that they have M-Pesa and things like this.
Yes.
So these payment technologies. But I think Bitcoin can do a much better job of it. But it's not just that. It's the efficiencies for companies. I think it can eliminate, or it can reduce costs substantially in many areas. The freedoms it can give people, and that's a bit of a tricky word, but the opportunities it can give people to control things from a phone. The newer possibilities such as joint ownership and things like that implemented through digital assets, and the possibilities are enormous.
I mean, I have a horrible sort of perhaps cynical fear here that when the internet started, it was all going to be like everyone was going to have their own websites, and it was sort of empowering for everybody.
Yes.
And then somehow that seems to have got into bigger and bigger, more and more powerful companies.
Yep.
And the individual feels more powerless. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
How do you think that will play out in this context?
I think that one of the things about Bitcoin is that it does give ownership of data and to the individual, right? And it removes it or reduces it from the corporate side. You can share what you want with the corporate
and that
entities.
Is just something that is the nature of the system and can't be fiddled with by a powerful corporation.
Yes,
you think?
exactly. Yes, yeah.
Somebody has also, I came across an article that said that that's all very well, but that means that the value in this system will be in the underlying blockchain, which is a good thing from the point of view of the individual, but it may mean that the incentive for startup companies to build apps is not so great because the value will never be able to be sort of realized by them in the same way that it has by the tech giants?
Well, the possibilities for a startup to grow and become as large as, and for the founders to become as wealthy as the Google founders, well.
Do you think the system does allow that as easily as it did on the internet?
I think it does, but not by taking people's data, right? Not by what the other capabilities are, you know, what someone will come up with.
Yes.
I think it opens a whole field of exploration and invention for new applications, and that empower people rather than take all of their information.
I saw also that you said somewhere that you are hoping one day to get back into building apps yourself.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that now. I keep changing my mind, to be honest. The infrastructure is so fascinating, and there's some amazing projects in there. Yeah.
Well, you work for nChain, so we're sort of winding up here, but just to sort of finish off, what I'd really like to understand is where the work of nChain finishes and the public work supporting the protocol starts, or are they just inextricably mixed at this stage, and how is that going to develop, do you think?
Well, so the base protocol is supposed to be set in stone. It's supposed to be, it is going to be unchangeable, right?
But you're just about to change it.
Yes, after this, I mean. Right. After Genesis, it won't change. But there's a lot of other work to do on standardization. And I know that the Bitcoin Association is taking a role here in organizing. And also these standards have not been, the standards that we have right now have not all been developed by nChain. We've certainly been a part of them because we were asked. But other developers have taken a leading role in developing these standards, for example, on how wallets can interoperate together. And these are standards that exist on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, so they exist for applications on top. The Bitcoin Association is organizing technical groups to discuss these standards and to formalize the standards. But again, standards are kind of optional, right? So you can start using a standard so that you can interoperate with everybody else who's using a standard, but you don't have to use it. If you want to use something else, you can, but then you lose that right. Integration option. Yeah. And
that is very similar to the way that other sectors govern themselves, really, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Like the World Wide Web Consortium and stuff. Well, yes. I guess in that case, they do make final decisions about domain names and so on that everyone has to stick to.
Yes, but in things like web protocols, they define like the basic web protocol. You don't actually have to use that, but it would be ridiculous if you didn't, right? Because no browser would be able to show you a website.
But if there was a group of people involved in this industry who said, well, actually, we think the underlying protocol should be changed like this, would they be able to do that, and through what sort of mechanism?
I think that the starting point there would be the Bitcoin Association, to talk to them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's certainly possible. There could be events that happen in the far future that might need a change, such as advances in cryptography or something like that, that might require us to make changes. We can't see any on the horizon for that yet, but it would require a collaboration between all of the miners to buy into it, because they are the ones who enforce the rules.
I mean, part of nChain's line on this is that miners are going to have to become more sort of political, in the sense that they will have to decide the way they want things to go. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And so they can differentiate the services they offer and different prices and so on.
Yeah.
How is that going to work out, do you think?
We're already seeing that happen slightly. So there was a miner, Mempool, I think, who started accepting transactions of a particular type at a much lower rate than other miners were accepting. And I think we'll continue to see that sort of development as miners identify an opportunity
And if they compete, do you see transaction fees coming down?
Yes, that's definitely something we want to see, or I'd love to see happen. We're going to certainly adjust the software to enable that more, so that they can put different pricing models in, so that there are choices. The miner has choices about the prices they want to set, more choice than they currently have. For different types of transactions and how much they want to charge for them, and this kind of opportunity.
Do you think if we were here this time next year, we will be in a very different place in terms of maybe even public awareness of Bitcoin SV?
I think so. I think there's going to be an awful lot happening this year, right? We're starting the year off beginning of February with a big change, and then the further development the rest of the year. I think there's a lot happening this year. It's going to be a pivotal, a very exciting year for us.
We're looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you very much. Well, thanks very much to Daniel. And if you want to find out more about Genesis, there's a lot of information at bitcoinsv.io. And for all things Bitcoin SV, don't miss the London CoinGeek Conference, which is on February the 20th. And for information on that, check out coingeek.com. Thanks very much for tuning in today, and please join me for the next edition of CoinGeek Conversations next week. From me, Charles Miller, goodbye.